Ever feel like earnings calls, they're just, I don't know, a bit much sometimes. Well, today we're diving into one that's anything but dull. Palantir's Q1 2024 report. It's got AI, big personalities, strong opinions, the works.
Yeah, their CEO, Alex Karp, he's certainly not one to shy away from, well, a bold statement or two,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to Palantir's U.S. performance.
Speaking of which, let's break down what has everyone so well excited.
So Palantir, they just wrapped up Q1 2024, and the numbers, they're pretty impressive. Strong revenue growth. This marks their sixth consecutive quarter in the green, and they're boasting a Rule of 40 score, get this, of 57%.
Now, I gotta ask, for those of us who maybe haven't brushed up on our financial jargon recently, what does Rule of 40 even mean in this context?
It's basically a quick measure of like, how's a company doing, combining their growth and their profitability. And a score above 40, that's like the top tier. Particularly in tech, it means things are going well, really well.
No signs of slowing down, then.
If you listen to them, absolutely not. And a lot of that confidence, it seems to stem from their take on AI, what they call AI for builders.
AI for builders, you say. So, like, AI that can actually, I don't know, build a house.
Not exactly, though, hey, I wouldn't rule it out completely in this day and age. What Palantir's focused on is giving businesses AI tools that are, well, useful. Tools that do more than just chat, Think less chatbot, more like problem-solving partner.
Okay, you've got my attention. Hit me with an example.
Sure. So they gave this example from a recent DoD hackathon. Someone used their platform and managed to take this one task targeting process. Usually takes hours, like 6 hours, and got it down to 10 seconds. That's the kind of efficiency they're talking about.
10 seconds from 6 hours. Yeah, that's impressive. But I mean, there are a lot of AI companies out there right now. Why does Palantir think they're the ones to, crack this?
Their argument boils down to this. They're saying AI models, the models themselves, are becoming kind of common, interchangeable almost. What sets them apart, they argue, is their software infrastructure. It's the stuff that actually makes AI usable for, well, everyone else.
So it's not just about the AI itself, but I guess, the whole package they deliver.
Exactly. They've got these three main components. Foundry, that's for managing and understanding huge amounts of data. Apollo, which is all about deploying and managing the software itself. And then there's their ontology.
Ontology. Okay, you lost me a bit there.
Right. Oh, sorry. Jargon. Think of it as this common language, right? Like all their systems, they speak it, which means everything's on the same page, working together the way it should. And this whole setup, this combination, that's what Palantir says, allows companies to do things with AI that, well, they just couldn't before.
Okay, starting to get the bigger picture. But great tech, you still have to get it into the right hands. What's their strategy for, I don't know, winning over customers?
Boot camps.
Boot camps. Are we talking like intense training montages now?
Not exactly, though. I get where you're coming from. These are like intensive 1 to 5 day things where Palantir basically says, all right, come on in, try our stuff out. But here's the kicker. They use the customer's own data. Show, don't tell, right? Really hands-on.
And I'm guessing this approach, it's getting some results.
Oh, yeah, big time. They're attributing, get this, a 69% jump year over year in their U.S. commercial customers to these boot camps. And they've seen are you ready for this, a 94% surge in deals closed.
Those numbers speak for themselves. It's like, it's not even just selling software at that point. It's changing how companies think about using AI in the first place.
100%. Palantir, they claim decisions that used to take, months are now happening in days because of this. And in the business world, speed, well, that's everything.
For sure. But Palantir isn't just doing this all alone, are they? Partnerships, those seem pretty central to their strategy, too.
Absolutely. They're using them to, really broaden their reach. And one area they're keen on is working with what they call hyperscalers.
Hyperscalers. Refresh my memory.
Think like the giants, right? Amazon, Google, Microsoft, those guys. Companies with massive cloud computing setups. By partnering with those companies, Palantir, they can leverage all that existing infrastructure, reach way more people than they could on their own.
Makes sense. Combine forces with the titans, amplify your impact, instead of starting from scratch every time.
Exactly. But here's the other thing. They're also focusing on building relationships with, well, the little guys, smaller players in the defense tech world, startups.
Interesting. What's the strategy there? Working with the smaller companies, some kind of like mentorship program.
It's more like a mutually beneficial kind of thing, For Palantir, it's a way to really cement their position in the Department of Defense, stay on top of new ideas. And for the startups, Well, they get to learn from the best, maybe get in on some bigger contracts. Everyone wins.
So less head-to-head and more like raising the tide for everyone.
Exactly. And speaking of big names, we can't talk about Palantir without mentioning, the CEO, Alex Karp.
Right. He's not known for being, shall we say, quiet. So what's he saying? What's the word on the earnings call about where Palantir's going?
One thing that came up again and again was this belief that their success, it's directly tied to the company culture and their values.
Which are...
Very rooted in, defending Western ideals.
Yeah.
He's very upfront about that.
And he has never been shy about that.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, has generated some lively debate, shall we say.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, it's been a sticking point for some, led to some interesting conversations, some people even leaving the company over it.
It's an interesting link, isn't it? Tying a tech company's success so closely to, well, values. Pretty bold, especially these days. But before we get too philosophical, I'm curious, what were the standout numbers from the report itself?
Oh, well, their U.S. commercial revenue growth, that was hard to miss.
Yeah.
A cool 68%, and that's not even counting revenue from some strategic contracts. And they've hit that sweet spot of consistent profitability, 6 quarters running, JAP profitability.
Which, in the world of tech, that's saying something.
For sure. Another one that jumped out was their revenue per employee up 26% year on year.
So doing more with the same team, getting more efficient.
Exactly. They're also pretty keen to highlight the growth in their U.S. commercial customer base, up 69% year on year, and the total value of the new contracts they signed, 131% jump year on year. So yeah, they're pretty chuffed.
More customers, bigger deals, doing it all more efficiently. Sounds like a winning formula. But there's always a but.
There always is. The question is, can they keep this up? Is this level of growth and profit sustainable, or is it?
Because we've all seen those companies, right? Riding high for a while and then...
Exactly. And with Palantir, that outspoken CEO, that very specific approach, it could be their biggest strength or, well...
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. Cutting-edge tech, a clear vision, a CEO who's, let's say, not afraid of a little disruption. But are they alienating potential clients who maybe prefer things a little more, traditional?
Right. And then there's the whole economic picture. They even admitted themselves things in Europe, which is a big market for them. Well,
we can't rely on just the U.S. forever. What's going on in Europe?
They said the economic slowdown, the current political climate, it's not exactly working in their favor.
Which is interesting, right? They've always had a good thing going in Europe, working with governments, businesses, all that. To hear them talk about headwinds there, it makes you think.
Makes you think maybe things are shifting, right?
Is this a temporary thing, or is it a sign of things to come?
The million-dollar question. Because if Europe's not buying it anymore, Palantir's, they're going to have to adapt.
Find a way to navigate this new landscape, or maybe focus on other markets, right? Asia, for example.
Exactly. It's a tough spot to be in. But if their track record tells us anything, well, Palantir, they don't back down from a challenge.
They seem to lean into them, if anything.
Which makes them an interesting case study, right? They force us to ask those bigger questions, about technology, values, the kind of future we're building. But we'll dive into all that in part 2. Join us then as we go even deeper into the world of Palantir. So, picking up where we left off, the big question is, can Palantir keep this up, this growth? Especially if Europe's not looking so hot, It's a tricky thing, right? Pushing boundaries, being outspoken. At what point does it start to turn off potential clients who might prefer, well, a more, traditional approach?
Classic innovator's dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Play it safe or risk it all. But it doesn't seem like Palantir's backing down anytime soon, do they?
Not a chance. In fact, you almost get the sense they kind of enjoy it, the, ruffling feathers a bit. Karp, on the call, he was talking about how conversations, like with those hyperscalers we talked about, the big cloud companies, he was saying those conversations are happening now that wouldn't have happened a few years ago. There's this feeling of we told you so, but also this understanding that they have to, play the game even as they're trying to change the rules.
Partnering with potential rivals, it's a delicate dance. But what's the end game here? Where do they see themselves fitting into the future of all this, the future of tech?
The billion-dollar question, right? But one thing's for sure, Palantir's not just building software, they're building a movement, you know what I mean? They've got this whole worldview, a belief system almost, about data, about security, about defending certain values. And they see their tech as the way to well, make that happen.
which of course hasn't been without its critics. That very specific stance, it's attracted some, well, let's just say not everyone's a fan. There are concerns about bias, about the potential for misuse, all of that.
And those are valid concerns? Absolutely. Any technology, especially powerful technology, it can be used for good or for, well, not so good. It all comes down to, who's using it and what they're using it for. The tricky part, especially with a company like Palantir, is, how do you ensure transparency, accountability, all of that?
Transparency is key, for sure. And to be fair to them, Palantir's been pretty open about these partnerships, both with those tech giants and with the smaller defense tech companies. Why do both? What's the thinking there?
It's smart, actually. It's like a two-pronged approach. So you've got the hyperscalers, right? Working with them gives Palantir access to like instant global reach, tons of resources. They can scale up way faster than if they were trying to build it all themselves.
A shortcut to a bigger stage, basically. Makes sense. But what about working with the smaller companies, the startups? That seems like a different game altogether.
It is, but it's just as strategic. Think of it like they're cultivating like an ecosystem around their tech. Working with these smaller companies, especially in the defense world, it lets them both shape the direction of the whole industry and also, keeps them at the forefront of what's new, what's next.
So it's not just about market share, it's about like shaping the future. That's a pretty big goal. But big goals, they usually come with big risks. What should we be watching for as this all plays out?
That's the question, isn't it? Will these partnerships, particularly with these huge companies, will it actually end up limiting Palantir's ability to do what they say they want to do to disrupt things?
Yeah.
Or will everyone benefit? Will it actually speed things up?
A delicate dance, for sure. Speaking of delicate dances, let's circle back to this whole AI for builders thing. They're really putting a lot of faith in this idea. But what does it actually mean for the builders themselves, the people actually using it?
It's about giving people tools to solve real problems using AI without needing to be, data scientists themselves. Imagine analysts, soldiers, even business leaders being able to use AI to make decisions faster, better decisions. That's the pitch, anyway.
It's a good pitch. But, and maybe this is cynical, what happens when those builders use those tools in ways Palantir didn't intend? Or, maybe even wouldn't approve of? Gets into some murky territory, ethically speaking.
It does. And it highlights this need for like a constant conversation, right, about AI, about how it's built, who controls it. Palantir is basically saying, trust us to build the tools and trust the people using them to use them wisely.
Big if, though, right?
And if that could make or break them in the end. They've definitely got people talking, that's for sure. But on a more concrete note, what else stood out to you from the earnings call? Anything particularly interesting?
One thing that stuck with me was how upfront they were about the challenges in Europe.
Right, the economic slowdown, the shifting political landscape, all that. Yeah, they didn't shy away from it at all. They even said outright that these things could really impact their growth there.
Which, again, is a big deal. We've talked about how strong they've been in Europe, so to hear them talk about headwinds there, well.
It makes you wonder, right? Is this a temporary thing or is it a sign of things to come? Like, is Europe just not into what Palantir's selling anymore? Or is it just, growing pains, figuring things out as they go?
Another million-dollar question, and one we'll be keeping an eye on for sure. But for now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about those boot camps again. They're really crediting them with a lot of their recent success. Why are they working so well, do you think?
I think it's kind of refreshing, honestly, in an industry that's all about, hype and promises. It's Palantir saying, look, don't take our word for it, come try it out. And not just try it out with your own data, your own problems.
Proof of concept right there in the room. It's a bold move, but it seems to be working, at least for now.
It's risky, for sure, but it shows you how much they believe in what they're doing.
And maybe how well they understand their audience. These aren't just any tech buyers, right? These are organizations with big, complex problems.
Exactly. They're not just buying software. They're buying into, a whole way of doing things.
And that brings us back to this idea of Palantir's worldview. Because that worldview, as we've said, it's a very specific one. It's about data as a tool for security, for defending certain ideas. But that raises the question, doesn't it, of sustainability?
It does. Can they really keep growing? Can any company that's so closely tied to a particular ideology thrive in a world that's, becoming more and more multipolar? Or will they need to find a way to broaden their appeal, to maybe even dial back the rhetoric a bit, to really succeed in the long run.
It's a balancing act for sure. How
Yeah.
do you hold on to what makes you unique, those core beliefs, while also adapting to a world that's constantly changing? It's something a lot of companies, a lot of countries even are struggling with right now.
For sure. And what happens with Palantir, it could end up being a sign of things to come, you know,
Oh.
for better or worse.
Lots to unpack there. One thing's for sure, things are never boring with this company. But before we go too far down that road, let's bring it back to the concrete for a moment. We've covered a lot, but there's one more thing from their earnings report that I think is worth talking about.
What's that?
The way they're changing how they sell, specifically this new approach they're calling boot camps.
Ah, yes, the boot camps. It's certainly a different way of doing things, wouldn't you say? Inviting potential customers in, giving them this immersive experience to, show off what the technology can do.
Unconventional, to say the least. But it also speaks to their confidence, don't you think? The fact that they're willing to let the technology speak for itself, to really put their money where their mouth is.
Absolutely. And it seems to be working, at least based on what they're reporting. They're
Yeah.
saying a good chunk of their recent growth, especially here in the U.S., is directly because of these boot camps.
Which suggests they might be onto something here. This approach of, showing, not telling, of letting potential clients get their hands dirty, so to speak, it's clearly resonating with some people.
It is. And it kind of flips the script on how sales is usually done, doesn't it? The whole song and dance of whining and dining clients, making promises. Palantir's basically saying, look, just come see for yourself.
It's a bold strategy, that's for sure. It'll be interesting to see if they can replicate that success in other markets with different types of
It
customers.
will. Because
Yeah,
what works for one company in one place at one time, it doesn't always translate, does it?
very true. Which brings us to another interesting piece of the puzzle, those partnerships we talked about.
Right, the partnerships. They're trying to walk this fine line, aren't they? Between wanting to disrupt everything and needing to, well, play nice with others.
It's the innovator's dilemma. And it's even more pronounced in tech, where the pace of change is so fast and it's not always clear who's on your side, who's the competition, all that.
Exactly. And Palantir, they're working with everyone, it seems, from those massive hyperscalers to, like we said, these small defense tech startups.
And each of those partnerships, I imagine, comes with its own, benefits and
Of
drawbacks.
course. So, for example, working with a hyperscaler, it gives them access to like this huge ready-made network, tons of money, resources.
Hmm.
But it also means they have to share the pie, right?
Mm.
Maybe even give up some control to companies that, well, might have their own plans.
Whereas partnering with the startups, that's more about like shaping the future, right? Building this whole ecosystem around what they're doing.
Right. But that also means being patient, playing the long game, and accepting that not every partnership is going to, pan out.
It's a balancing act, that's for sure. And how well Palantir manages that act? Well, that could determine whether they reach those big, ambitious goals they've set for themselves. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's zoom out for a minute. We've talked a lot about, the technology, their plans, these partnerships. But what about their philosophy? Like, what are the core beliefs that drive this company?
Now that's a question that could keep us busy for a while.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But it's an important one, don't you think? Because to really understand Palantir, you have to understand how they see the world, their ideas about power, about technology, about the future.
I agree. And you can see those ideas in everything they do, from how they talk about themselves to the products they build, even who they hire.
Right, it's bigger than just building a company. It's about building a movement. And movements, well, they need a purpose, a shared set of beliefs.
Exactly. And for Palantir, that purpose, it really comes down to this belief in the power of data, the critical importance of national security, and the need to, in their view, defend Western values.
And that's where things get, well, a little more complicated, right? Because those beliefs, while clearly deeply held by the people at the top and probably many of their employees, they're not exactly universally shared, are they?
They're not.
Yeah.
And that's led to, well, some would say they're a controversial company. There are accusations of bias, concerns about their technology being used for, well, let's just say not so great things.
It's a valid concern. Any technology, no matter how good the intentions, it can be used in ways its creators never imagined. And the more powerful the technology, well, the higher the stakes get.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, right? To really examine the ethics of it all, to make sure that something like Palantir's technology is being used
You're
responsibly.
100%. Technology, it's not neutral. It reflects the values of the people who create it. And as AI gets more and more powerful, we have to be very careful about what values are being, baked in.
Which brings up a big question. How do we make sure these technologies are used for good? How do we prevent them from making existing problems worse or, even undermining the very things we value?
Big, big questions. And honestly, I don't know if there are any easy answers, but I think the first step is simply talking about it, recognizing how complex this all is, and being willing to, check our own assumptions at the door.
Couldn't agree more. The future is not like preordained. We get to decide what it looks like.
And that's a responsibility that falls on all of us. Whether we're the ones writing the code, making the laws, or just, living in this increasingly digital world, we all have a role to play in making sure technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've really, delved deep here. We've covered Palantir's financials, their tech, their game plan, their partnerships, even their whole philosophy.
It's been a whirlwind, that's for sure. And yet I feel like there's still so much more to explore.
There always is, especially with a company well, as complex and, let's face it, as consequential as Palantir. But that's what makes them so fascinating, right? They're like this microcosm of all the big changes happening in the world right now.
And their story, however it ends up, it's going to tell us a lot about the choices we're making today, the world we're creating for tomorrow.
No doubt about it. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about, wouldn't you say? Shall we let them mull it over for now?
Let's do it. But don't worry, we'll be back with even more on Palantir. We've just scratched the surface. Join us next time as we dive into Gerald.
Well, you'll have to tune in to find out. So we've covered Palantir's, pretty amazing quarter, their whole AI for builders strategy, and those, let's be honest, kind of wild boot camp demos. But before we sign off, what's the one thing you think people should really take away from all this whole Palantir story? It's their unwavering commitment to their, I guess you could say, philosophy that really fascinates me. They're not afraid to be opinionated, to take a stand in a world where a lot of companies try to be everything to everyone. And it's working for them, at least for now. But can they keep it up?
Right. It makes you wonder, can you really be that, I don't know, that ideologically driven and still become this, global tech titan? Or will they have to, at some point, maybe soften their stance a bit, be a little more inclusive to reach those really big goals?
It's a question that goes beyond just Palantir, really. It's about how any company, or even any country, balances those core beliefs, the things that make them who they are, with the need to, adapt to a world that's constantly changing. What happens with Palantir could be a sign of things to come for all of us.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. From their AI ambitions to how they're navigating the global scene, Palantir is a company full of, contradictions, complexities, even maybe a few cautionary tales.
Definitely. They're a fascinating study in ambition, in innovation, and in the challenges of, staying true to yourself in a world where the only constant is change.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time we emerge from the Palantir rabbit hole. For now, anyway. A huge thanks to you for helping us navigate all this.
Always a pleasure to dive in with you.
And to our listeners, as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the trends shaping our world. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring.